My name is Ava Larkin. I'm 31. And until this spring, the most valuable thing I owned was a secondhand piano with a sticky middle C. Then my grandfather, the billionaire half this town worked for, passed away. And in a lawyer's office that smelled like lemon polish, I heard my own name read out alone over a $7 billion estate while my parents and my brother sat 3 feet away and stopped breathing. My family demanded every penny that same night. I said no. By 10:00, my life was in trash bags on their driveway. By morning, they were at my grandfather's gates with a locksmith and a camera. But here's what none of them knew. Grandpa had spent 12 years preparing for that exact morning. And the person waiting at his front door was only his opening move. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where family secrets come to light and quiet people stop being quiet. Today's story has a $7 billion estate, a locksmith at dawn, and a grandfather who planned his last lesson from beyond the grave. If you believe family is proven by how people treat you when there's money on the table, drop a comment below, and be sure to subscribe. You'll want to hear how this one ends. To picture my life before March. Picture small on purpose. I taught piano in a rented studio downtown, rented as it happens from my own parents who owned the building and never once let me forget the discount. I lived in the carriage house behind their place, a one-room apartment over the old garage, because the rent was fair, and I told myself proximity was the same thing as closeness. In my family, you were measured by your title at Larkin Container Group. My father, Gordon, was Chief Operating Officer 36 years in. My brother, Brent, was Vice President of Marketing, which meant he posted videos of forklifts set to music. My mother, Pet, ran the charity galas that kept the family name polished. And me, at dinner parties I was filed under other. Iva teaches piano, my mother would say, in the voice you'd use to admit a relative had joined a circus. But Sundays were mine. Every Sunday at 4. I drove the 20 minutes to Larkin House, my grandfather's place on the ridge, and I played for him in the music room. My grandmother, Ruth's old Steinway, kept tuned 9 years after her death. He'd settle into the wing chair, and before I touched a single key, he would rise, cross the room, and wind the little brass metronome she'd left on the lid. Same ritual, 20 years running. Once when I was rushing a Chopin piece to get to the good part, he stopped me with one finger in the air. Hold the tempo, he said. Never chase the noise. I thought it was advice about music. I believed that for 20 years, right up until the season it turned out to be instructions for a war. You should know why those Sundays existed. Because everything in this story grows out of them. My grandmother Ruth was a piano teacher who married a machinist with grease under his nails back before anyone put the words Harlan Larkin on the side of a warehouse. She taught scales to half of Fairmont for 50 cents a lesson while he built one packaging plant into 40. The money got enormous. She did not. When she died 9 years ago, the house went quiet in a way that scared everyone off except me, because I was the only one who could make the piano go. My Sunday recital weren't a granddaughter's charity. They were the last room in that man's life where his wife still lived. Here's the other thing you need, and I'll say it plainly. I had watched what Grandpa's money did to the people in its orbit. I watched it turn my father's shoulders into a coat hanger for the company. I watched Christmases become budget meetings, watched my uncles sue and lose and vanish, watched every family dinner turn into a performance review. So at 22, when Grandpa offered to pay my way through a conservatory in the East, I said, no thank you. I decided small was the same thing as safe. I built a life where no one could accuse me of taking anything, and I called that integrity, and I wore it like a medal. Grandpa never argued. He just said something strange, once over the top of his reading glasses. You're the only one in this family who's never asked me for a thing. Do you know how visible that makes you? I laughed it off. He didn't laugh with me. He was already keeping a list I couldn't see. His last year, he slowed down in the legs, but never in the eyes. The Sunday visits got longer, and the questions got stranger. He'd wait until I finished a piece, let the last note hang in the room a moment longer than usual, and then ask me something sideways in the tone of a man doing arithmetic he did not intend to show. If this house were yours, what would you do with the ballroom? I remember laughing. Fill it with beginners, terrible ones, the brave kind. He didn't smile. He picked up the little leather notebook he kept by the chair, wrote something in it, and closed it. And for reasons I can't explain, I didn't ask what. Another Sunday out of nowhere. When I'm gone, they'll come to you with their hands out. You'll want to make yourself small. Don't. I told him not to talk like that the way you do. And he waved me off like a man swatting at sentiment. But the one that stayed with me came in February. The last month, when his breath had started keeping its own slow count. I was pulling the cover over the piano keys when he caught my wrist, his grip still surprising, still a machinist's, and said, "When I'm gone, ask Marisol for the blue binder." Marisol Vega had run his house for 30 years. She knew where everything was, including things that didn't exist yet. I said, "What blue binder, Grandpa?" And he just patted my hand and said the tempo line again like it answered everything. Driving home that night, I did something I'm not proud of. I decided he was starting to slip, the way people decide the weather. It was easier than believing the alternative. That the sharpest man I ever knew was watching something come up the road, clear his throat toward me, and had already timed it to the minute. He died on the second Tuesday in March at 91 in the wing chair in the music room with the radio playing a nocturne he'd have called too slow. His heart simply finished. Marisol found him with his reading glasses still on and the little notebook closed on his knee. And she told me later that the house knew before she did. That some rooms change temperature when they stop being waited in. The funeral filled the biggest church in the county and spilled onto the lawn. 3 generations of plant workers came in their good jackets. The governor sent a wreath the size of a satellite dish. And my family grieved the way they did everything for an audience. Brent filmed a tribute reel in front of the casket. 2 takes because the first one caught him checking his phone. My father stood in the receiving line next to Dan Mercer, the company's chief executive, murmuring the word transition to every third handshake. A man networking at his own father's funeral. My mother rearranged the flowers twice so the ribbons would read on camera. I keep no anger about any of it anymore. I'm just reporting the weather in that church. When it was my turn, I didn't give a speech. I sat down at the piano they'd wheeled in and played the nocturne he never got to hear finished. And somewhere in the second page, I stopped hearing the crowd. And it was Sunday again. And the last key came down into a silence so complete you could hear the candles. That was my goodbye. 20 minutes later in the fellowship hall, my father put his hand on my shoulder and said we'd all been called to the lawyer's office at the end of the month. He was almost gentle. It was the last gentle thing he did. Elliot Crane's office took up the top floor of the oldest building downtown, and Elliot Crane himself looked like a man who measured every sentence by what it would cost somebody. 66. Dry as a courtroom in August. My grandfather's estate lawyer for 12 years. He read the plan without theater. The bulk of the estate, the controlling shares, the investments, close to 5 of the 7 billion poured into the Larkin Foundation, the charity my grandfather had built and quietly fattened for a decade. The house on the ridge and everything personal sat in a trust. And then the sentence that rearranged the room. Sole individual beneficiary, successor trustee, and designated chair of the foundation, Ava Ruth Larkin. Me. The lemon polish smell got very loud. My father received the lake cabin and his father's wristwatch. My brother received a 1967 pickup truck he'd once called an embarrassment. My mother received Ruth's china. There was also, Crane said, a further provision concerning the family to be addressed at the appropriate time. A sentence I'd remember later, the way you remember a door you walked past. Then he read the no contest clause slowly. The way you'd read a fence sign about the bull. Anyone who challenged the plan forfeited whatever it granted them, and the trust had been amended 9 times in 12 years, each amendment consistent, each accompanied by a physician's letter confirming my grandfather's capacity. 9 consecutive years of them from Dr. Naomi Price. The silence afterward had a pitch to it, high and thin. Then my father laughed. One short note. The laugh of a man certain the universe had made a filing error that would be corrected by close of business. My mother texted the family thread before we reached the elevator. Family dinner tonight. We fixed this as a family. Dinner was pot roast and an ambush. The table was set for a holiday. And next to my plate, where other families put a napkin, sat a document in a navy folder. Brent had it printed before the will was cold. Family settlement agreement. My name on the signature line. Everything redistributed the way it should have been. His phrase delivered with the smile he used on clients. My mother talked about unity. My brother talked about optics. My father didn't talk for a long time, and when he did, he used his boardroom voice. The one that treats disagreement as a scheduling problem. You'll sign it, Ava. This isn't a windfall, it's a payroll error. I told them no. I said it quietly and I said, why? Grandpa signed what he signed. I won't write over a dead man's signature. And my father looked at me, the man whose meetings I was never important enough to interrupt, and gave me the sentence I expect to hear in some form on my last day on earth. I earned him. You just played piano. What happened after that happened fast and slow at once. By 10 that night, the locks on the carriage house had been changed while I was still at the table arguing. My clothes were on the driveway in contractor bags. My mother stood behind the curtain in the kitchen window and did not come out, and my studio keys were demanded back on the porch steps like I was a fired janitor. I photographed all of it, every bag, the shiny new deadbolt. Because a teacher learns to document everything the first time a parent screams at her. Then I sat in my car and called the only number that made sense. Marisol answered on the second ring. The room's made up, Miss Ava, she said. He told me you'd come. The gates of Larkin House swung open before I finished rolling down my window, which told me Marisol had been watching the camera feed since I called. It's a strange thing arriving at a 40-room house at midnight with your life in trash bags. She met me under the porte-cochere with tea already made and did not say one word about the bags, which is a kind of grace they don't teach. Inside the house was a museum of Sundays, his chair, her piano, the smell of lemon oil and cold fireplaces. Marisol walked me down the hall, reciting what she called the standing instructions. A liturgy she'd clearly been holding for months. The porch light stays on until you're asleep. The music room is never locked. The guest seat by the music room is yours. He said you'd refuse the master, so don't bother offering. I slept in my clothes on top of the covers. The way you sleep in a house that isn't yours yet. And I want to pause here and ask you something honestly. Has money ever shown you the true face of someone you loved? A parent, a sibling, someone whose voice changed the day there was something to divide? Tell me in the comments how you saw it coming or how you didn't, because I thought I knew my family and I had not seen the trash bags coming. If this story is landing somewhere tender, take 1 second and subscribe. It helps more than you know, and you'll want to be here for what my grandfather did next. Because at 6:00 the next morning, I woke to a sound I'll never unhear. Tires on gravel, several sets coming up the long drive, slow and confident, like a parade that owned the route. From the guest suite window, I counted them coming up the drive. My father's sedan, my mother's crossover, Brent's leased German thing, and behind them, a white van with a deadbolt logo, a locksmith at dawn on retainer. They parked in formation around the fountain like a hostile board meeting. Brent was already filming, walking backward up the steps, narrating to his phone in his documentary voice. We're here recovering our family home from an unstable individual. This is what elder exploitation looks like, folks. A fourth car brought a man in a suit I didn't recognize, carrying a briefcase like it embarrassed him. A lawyer I'd learn from 2 counties over. The kind you hire when every good one in the state has turned you down, and you don't yet know why. My father marched the group up the stone steps with a folded paper in his fist. Some homemade notice demanding I vacate pending family resolution. A phrase with the legal weight of a birthday card. And then the whole parade stopped moving at once like a needle lifted off a record, because the front door of Larkin House was already open, and standing in it at 6:00 in the morning, in a pressed gray suit with his tie knotted, and a single file folder under his arm, was a man who had clearly been waiting for them, not surprised, not hurried. Positioned in the exact center of the doorway the way you'd station a piece on a chessboard. Behind his shoulder stood Marisol with her arms crossed, and down by the fountain, engine off, sat a county sheriff's cruiser with a deputy inside sipping coffee, invited, parked, and patient. I watched my father's face find the man in the doorway, and go a color I had never seen on him. Here's what I didn't know yet. Standing barefoot at the top of the stairs, listening through the open door. For 2 weeks, my father had been courting Elliot Crane, not writing to him, courting him, lunch invitations, calls to his partners, a gift basket, God help us, with a bottle of scotch older than me. Because if you wanted to break a 9-figure estate plan in this state, Crane's firm was the one you hired, and everyone knew it. Crane had declined every approach without giving a reason. The reason was now standing in my grandfather's doorway at 6:00 in the morning with his tie already knotted. "Mr. Larkin," Crane said, pleasant as a toll booth. "I'm afraid I've had a client for 12 years. You're standing on his porch." I watched 36 years of executive composure leave my father's body through his knees. Crane opened the folder without hurry. "The house," he explained, "belonged to the trust. The trust designated its occupant, and the occupant was me, effective the moment my grandfather's heart stopped. Setting one foot past the threshold would be trespass, and the deputy by the fountain, invited by the trustee as a courtesy, would handle the paperwork. The locksmith, hearing the word trespass, packed his drill without being asked twice. The hired lawyer touched my father's elbow and suggested the cars, and as they retreated, my father turned and shouted at the closed door. "Really?" shouted Vanes and spit. While Brent's camera, still rolling, caught every second of a man screaming at a house. That clip would matter later and not the way Brent planned. Crane watched the cars go, then looked up at me on the stairs as if we had a standing appointment. "He left you homework," he said. Asked Marisol for the blue binder. The blue binder was the size of a phone book and had my name on the spine in his blocky machinist's hand. Marisol set it on the kitchen table, like it was warm bread she'd been keeping for me. Inside was not money and not sentiment. It was a syllabus 90 days laid out week by week. 14 people I was to meet in a specific order with a page on each. What they ran, what they feared, what to ask them. Files to read, 1 set per week, the company, the foundation, the trust, the town. Page 1 was a letter, 6 lines, no preamble. And it ended the only way it could have ended. Hold the tempo, never chase the noise. I sat down hard on a kitchen chair, because the sentence I'd heard over that piano for 20 years had never once been about music. Crane took the chair across from me and drew the battlefield in that dry voice. The trust was 12 years old, amended 9 times, every amendment consistent, every year documented by Dr. Price. A contest would be legal suicide, and my family's new out-of-town lawyer would figure that out within the month. "So, they won't fight you in court," Crane said, folding his hands. "They'll fight you everywhere else. Your job is to still be standing in 90 days. I looked at the binder, thick as a dictionary, and the ache I'd been outrunning caught me at last. I teach 8-year-olds where to put their thumbs. Somebody had just handed me a town. That afternoon, as if the universe wanted the point in writing, my phone buzzed. The first mother pulling her daughter out of my Tuesday lesson. "So sorry," she wrote. "Just until things settle down." Things were not going to settle down. The siege ran on paper and whispers, And every round of it was perfectly legal, which is the part nobody warns you about. First came the certified letter ending my studio lease. Month to month, 30 days notice. My mother's signature at the bottom in her gala invitation cursive. They're building, they're right. Nothing to fight, nothing to file, just my name scraped off a door I'd painted myself. Then the whisper went out through Fairmont, the way whispers travel in a company town, from the plant floor to the pharmacy line. She isolated the old man at the end, kept the family away. You'd hear it come back to you with new details each time, the way a melody gets ornamented. 3 more students gone by Friday. My barber's wife looked through me. At the farmer's market like I was a window. And then Brent went nuclear in the way of his generation. A 14-minute video titled My Family's Stolen Legacy, Part 1, with a thumbnail of my face frozen mid-blink, so I looked medicated. Sad piano music underneath. The irony apparently free of charge. 1 million views in 4 days. The comments called me a manipulator, a gold digger, and several words I won't repeat with names on them. I want to be precise about what this felt like, because precise is all I have. It felt like being erased in my own hometown by people using tools no law can touch. A lease is legal. A rumor is legal. A video is legal. I had a fortune I hadn't asked for, and couldn't spend a dime on the only thing I wanted, which was my Tuesday students back. That night, for the first time since the funeral, I opened the music room door. The Steinway was under its sheet like furniture in a house where nobody expected music again. And on the lid, exactly where it had sat every Sunday of my life, was my grandmother's brass metronome. I stood there a long time before I picked it up. And when I did, something shifted under the bass. A card taped there in his handwriting. Ballroom beginners. H. The thing he'd written in the leather notebook 2 years ago, the Sunday I made my joke. He'd kept my answer like a receipt. And when I went back to the binder that night and found the foundation's budget section, there it was. Approved and funded and waiting, a line item in black ink, music education program, Fairmont pilot, director to be determined. He hadn't left me a vault. He left me a job written in my own words. And he'd been holding it under a metronome until I was cornered enough to find it. I wound the metronome and let it tick into the empty room, 40 beats to the minute. His favorite argument. I'd been living in that enormous house, like a guest who apologizes to the furniture, sleeping in one room, drinking from one cup, waiting for someone to tell me I was allowed. You'll want to make yourself small, he'd said. Don't, so that night I stopped. I moved my 3 boxes into the house for real. I opened every door on the 2nd floor and let the rooms breathe. I set the blue binder on his desk in the study, squared it to the blotter, and turned to day 1 like a student the night before term. Day 1 said, Dan Mercer, Chief Executive. Ask him what your father does all day. Then underneath in the same steady hand, a second instruction that raised the hair on my arms. Ask him twice. The metronome ticked on the piano lid behind me. I left it running while I read, and I have kept time by it ever since. I did the syllabus the only way I knew how, like a teacher. Dan Mercer expected a sympathy meeting. I brought a notebook and asked him to walk me through the company's money the way he'd teach a scale, 1 hand at a time, slow enough to hear the wrong notes. He smiled at that. The smile faded around the 4 mark when the piano teacher asked why receivables sang in one rhythm and payables in another. I'm not going to pretend I became a businesswoman in a week. I didn't. But teaching beginners for a decade trains you in one skill the boardroom forgets. You can hear when someone is faking a passage they haven't practiced. And when I asked Mercer what my father actually did all day, the first time I got the org chart answer. The second time, exactly as instructed, I let the silence sit there like a metronome with the lid off. And Mercer glanced at the door and told me the truth. My father's operational authority had been quietly hollowed out 2 years ago in a reorganization nobody could explain. His title intact, his signing power gone, a corner office wrapped around an empty room, and no one, including Mercer, knew why the old man had done it. File that away. I had to because the same week, a friendly plant manager slid me a photocopy with sweat on the edges, a memo circulating among a handful of directors, drafted in my father's voice arguing for an emergency valuation of the company, a fast, quiet sale to a management group at what the memo called family value to rescue the business from unstable stewardship. Unstable stewardship was me. My father wasn't licking his wounds in that corner office. He was organizing. Colette Bruner ran the foundation from an office with more plants than furniture. And before she'd show me a single grant file, she sat me down and said there was something I should hear before I judged my father, because she'd been around this family longer than I'd been alive. In 1990, my father was 24 and he held an acceptance letter to an architecture school back east. He'd wanted it since he was a boy drawing bridges on butcher paper. And my grandfather, who had built something too big to leave, and had exactly one son, said, "1 year, son, learn the floor. Then go draw all the buildings you want." 1 year became 5. 5 became a title. A title became 36. And somewhere in there, the drawing stopped. And the only person who ever told Heron Larkin to give the boy his life back was my grandmother. And when she died, the subject died with her. "Your father paid a whole life into that company, Ava." Colette said not unkindly. "He isn't wrong about the price. He's wrong about who owed it to him." I drove home with that sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone, and found Crane waiting in the study with the day's second lesson in human arithmetic. A letter had arrived at the trustee's office on good paper with 9 signatures. 9 senior executives, my father's men, informing the trust that unless the company was sold to its management team at a fair family valuation, all 9 would resign the same Friday and take their client relationships with them. Half of Fairmont's paychecks placed gently on the table, like a hostage's photograph. The letter's last line had my father's fingerprints all over its grammar. "Ownership belongs to those of us who actually earned this company." There it was again, earned. Crane set a sealed envelope beside the letter, wax and all, and said, "Before you answer them, your grandfather wanted you to read this alone." I read it alone at his desk with the study door shut, and I'm going to tell you what was in it the same way it came to me, cold, in order, with no way to look away. An internal audit file, bank records, 6 years of invoices from a vendor called Meridian Crating LLC, a company that supplied Lark and Container with nothing because it did not exist anywhere except on paper and in a bank account controlled by my father. 18 million moved in patient, boring increments, the way embezzlement looks when it's done by a man who signs off on his own oversight. My grandfather had found it 2 years ago. And here is the part I had to read 3 times. He told no one, not the board, not the prosecutors, not even Crane at first. He bought back the exposure himself, his own money, quietly so the company's books would never bleed. And then he staged that unexplained reorganization, the one that puzzled Mercer, stripping my father's signing authority under cover of efficiency, so it could never happen again. He built a wall around his son and disguised it as an org chart. The last page was a single sheet in his handwriting, and it answered the question I'd been carrying since the lawyer's office. Why me? Why the piano teacher? Why not the man who gave the company his life? "A man who burns his family to win has already caught the disease," he wrote. "I am not punishing my son. I am quarantining my money. This file is only ever a shield, never a sword." I sat there until the ink stopped swimming. 20 minutes earlier, I had 2 parents, one who'd wounded me and one who scared me. Now I had a father I loved more and trusted less than I ever had in my life. Both at once, and no shelf in my chest to put that on. And 9 signatures on the trust's desk were still waiting for an answer by Friday. Mercer wanted to use it. He never said the word leak. Executives don't. But he laid out how 1 page of that file shown privately to 2 of the 9 would end the revolt in an hour. And he wasn't wrong, and that's exactly what made it wrong. Crane, for his part, went neutral as a scale. He named the cost of each road and declined to push. I heard my grandfather's handwriting instead. Only ever a shield, never a sword. He sealed it for a reason, I said. I'm not unsealing it to win an argument. So, I fought the only way I knew, which turned out to be the way he'd trained me all along, one student at a time. I took the syllabus files and booked 9 meetings in 5 days. No lawyers, no agenda. Coffee in the plant conference room with the wobbly table. I knew because the binder knew which of the 9 had a daughter starting college and a tuition knot in his stomach. I knew who'd been passed over twice. Who genuinely loved the place, who was only scared of being the last chair when the music stopped. I didn't threaten anyone, and I didn't buy anyone. I showed each man the foundation's expansion plan, the retention terms the board had approved, and the one fact my father's memo had left out of its math. The trust was not selling, so the only thing resigning would accomplish was resigning. By Friday, 6 of the 9 had quietly withdrawn their names. Quick question from the middle of the war, and I ask because I lived it. When family turns on you, do you fight with their weapons or your own? Tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe because the next envelope on my desk had a wax seal too, and it was addressed to my father. Their legal war died in a single page. And I want you to see the shape of it, because it's the quietest checkmate in this whole story. My family's out-of-town lawyer sent Crane a 40-page draft petition, unsigned, unfiled, alleging undue influence, elder isolation, the whole catalog, with a cover note offering to keep it unfiled if the trust came to the table by Friday. A threat dressed as a courtesy. Crane replied with 1 page. It contained an index of Dr. Price's capacity letters, 9 consecutive years of them, a citation to the no contest clause, a reminder that a certain reconciliation provision existed and would be forfeited by any contest, and 1 closing sentence I have framed in my memory. Your clients are welcome to trade. $30 million for a filing fee. I didn't know yet what the $30 million meant. Their lawyer apparently did, because within 2 weeks he had withdrawn from the representation entirely, and no firm in the state picked it up. And it wasn't fear, it was arithmetic, and it was also my grandfather. I learned later he had consulted over the years with every serious trust litigation firm within 300 miles. A 1-hour consultation, a modest check, a conflict of interest planted like a fence post, 12 years of fence posts. But while the courthouse door swung shut, the other war peaked. A regional tabloid ran a full spread. Iris changed the locks while the family grieved, built on Brent's edited doorstep footage. My face in freeze frame. My father's screaming cropped out. At church that Sunday, the pew around me stayed empty in both directions. The cashier at Hobbs Grocery counted my change onto the belt so she wouldn't touch my hand. A fortune in the bank, and I couldn't buy eye contact in my own town. My mother came on a Thursday alone, unannounced, holding an apple pie with a dish towel over it, like the last 30 years hadn't happened. Marisol looked at me across the foyer with a question. I nodded and we sat in the kitchen, my mother and I, the way we never had. For 1 hour she was my mother. She'd brought a photo album, the real one, with the corners gone soft, me at 5, playing a paper keyboard. She'd drawn on the kitchen table in chalk marker, because lessons cost money we didn't have then. She told the story of the chalk keyboard, the way she used to tell it, laughing in the right places. And I felt a door in my chest I'd bolted 20 times swing open on one hinge. Because hope is a weed. It grows back through concrete. Then with the tea gone cold, she reached into her bag and set a folder on the table. And I watched her face change management like a shift whistle had blown. The family unity agreement drafted by Brent's new lawyer. Little sticky arrows pointing to signature lines. Brent would receive the company. I would keep the house and, as she put it, my little foundation. And then we're a family again, sweetheart, come home. I looked at the pie, and the album, and the arrows, and I understood, with a clean surgical sadness, that she had not come as my mother. She'd come as a courier and the pie was packaging. I kissed the top of her head because rage was not what I felt. Inventory was what I felt and walked her to the door. Tell Brent's lawyer he forgot the notary block. I said it was the kindest true sentence I had. That night I couldn't sleep, and I'm glad because the thing that happened at 2:00 in the morning needed me awake for it. I sat on the piano bench in the dark without playing hands in my lap. And I asked myself the question underneath all the other questions. If I signed their papers, any of their papers, would I get my family back? Or would I just be buying season tickets to watch them perform one? I already knew, too. What I didn't know was what I'd be instead. Because I had spent 31 years being the Larkin who wanted nothing. And that woman could not run a foundation, face down a tabloid, or sit across from her father again. Smallness had been my whole architecture. I lifted the key cover and played his nocturne with one hand, slow, the metronome ticking its 40 patient beats. And somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped being angry at the size of what he'd handed me, and heard it for what it was. Not a burden dropped on the smallest back in the family, but a bet placed 12 years ago that the smallest back was the strongest one. The binder's last page had been sitting in my head for weeks. Day 90. No instructions, just one line. Decide who you are, and then underneath smaller, out loud. I closed the piano, went to the study, and called Elliot Crane at 10:05 in the morning, which I suspect delighted him, though his voice stayed dry as ever. Set the annual meeting where he wanted it, I said. Warehouse 1 and Elliot, draft both letters. There was a pause with a smile hidden in it. Both, he said. Both, I said, and hung up and wound the metronome and started the coffee. They held the annual meeting in Warehouse 1, because he'd wanted it there. The first building, 1963, the one with his initials scratched into the loading dock cement where a foreman dared him to. They cleared the floor and set out 800 folding chairs, and it wasn't enough. Plant workers stood along the racking 3 deep, and the press stood on the mezzanine, and the town, in every sense, attended. I did not read from a page. I'd taught too many recitals to trust paper over practice. I stood at the microphone in my grandmother's gray dress, let the room settle to pitch, and said 3 things. The company was not for sale. Not to strangers, not to management, not at family value. Whatever family was currently supposed to mean. The executive team that had held the floor steady would keep running it, and I would be exactly what the trust named me, a steward, not a genius. And Stuart was enough. And the Larkin Foundation's first act under my chairmanship would happen in Fairmont. Funding, among other things, a music program with more nerve than Polish. Then I accepted the trusteeship and the chair in front of 800 witnesses, and every camera my brother's tabloid friends could rent. And the piano teacher who'd spent her life avoiding rooms like that felt the old life close behind her softly like a fallboard. During questions, a voice I'd known my whole life cracked across the floor. Did you even cry when he died? Brent, standing on a chair, phone up, hunting for the clip that would save his channel. 800 heads turned. I waited one full beat, his beat, the old man's 40 to the minute. My grandfather taught me to hold the tempo and never chase the noise, I said. Grief keeps its own time. So does this company. Next question. The room did something I hadn't heard in 4 months. It applauded. That night at 11, my phone lit with a number I hadn't seen since March. My father, 1 line, 1 meeting, family only, no lawyers. Before I answered him, Crane came to the house with a document case, and an expression I hadn't seen on him in all the months I'd known him, which on Elliot Crane passes for visible emotion, and he waited until Marisol had left the study before he spoke. He instructed me to hold this until you were strong enough to carry it, he said. In my judgment, that was Tuesday. Inside were 3 envelopes and a codicil. The further provision from the reading, the 30 million his 1-page letter had dangled in front of my family's lawyer. Reconciliation trusts, 10 million each for my father, my mother, my brother, released or not, within 12 months of his death on one condition. And the condition was not income or behavior or lawyers. It was a single handwritten sentence. And I stood at the study window and read it until I had it by heart. Released if in AA's sole judgment they came to her as family and not as claimants. He hadn't left them nothing after all. He'd left them a question and he'd addressed it to me. The cruelty of it and the mercy of it arrived together, indistinguishable, like twin notes a half step apart. My advisors split the moment they heard. Mercer was pure arithmetic. Sign the releases. 30 million is cheap for peace. Cheaper than one more year of war. Colette held my hand and said, "Think of your mother. Think of the pie and the chalk keyboard. People are more than their worst season." Marisol said nothing at all. She took the brass metronome down from the piano, polished it with her apron hem, and set it back, which I have thought about every day since. I texted my father back one line. Sunday, the music room. Bring your tempers if you want. Leave the term sheets. Saturday night, I prepared the room the way I'd prepare a recital, because ritual is what hands do when the heart is over capacity. I carried 3 chairs from the dining room and set them in a shallow arc facing the Steinway, not across a table. I was done with tables. And I put my grandmother's lace runner on the piano lid. And on the runner, I laid the 2 letters Elliot Crane had drafted for me, side by side, both signed by no one. Here's what they were. Since you've come this far with me. The first released all 3 trusts in full. 30 million. Wired within the week. My grandfather's last gift opened like Christmas morning. The second was called a determination letter, and it was 4 paragraphs of Crane's driest prose finding that the condition of the codicil had not been met, that in the sole judgment of the trustee, they had fond as family, and that the trustees would therefore never fund, final, binding, irrevocable, no appeal, no second seas, and 1 signature line, each only one would ever be signed as satin ether, by 3 lines. Italy one would propose a an old teacher's habit, and stood the longest at my mother's, closest to the window, where the light would be gentle. Before I set out the good teacups nobody had used in 9 years, Marisol appeared in the doorway near midnight and asked if I wanted her gone in the morning. No, I said. Stay! He'd want a witness who loved him. She nodded like I'd finally answered a question she'd been holding since March. Last, I wound the brass metronome and set it on the lid between the letters. Ready? It's pendulum still. Then I turned off the lamps and stood in the dark of the room where he died, and I learned to play. And I told him out loud, since day 90 insisted, that I knew what I was going to do, and that I knew what it would cost, and that I was going to do it anyway. Sunday came up the drive at 10:00 sharp. 1 car this time, 3 doors closing. And in the chest pocket of my brother's shirt, a tiny red light already blinking. They came into the music room the way tourists enter a church they have decided is overrated. My father first, reading the room for leverage, my mother clutching her purse like a hymnal. Brent last. Phone in his chest pocket, lens peeking over the seam, that little red light steady. I saw it before he cleared the doorway. Teachers see everything. It's the job. I said nothing, and you may judge me for that, but I had my reasons, and one of them was pedagogical. I poured tea. My father ignored his, and opened the meeting like the chief operating officer of my life. They had reflected, he said. Litigation was beneath this family. So here was the final framework. I would transfer the company, or if I insisted on playing executive 300 million, which he called a rounding error, against 7 billion, and in exchange they would sign global releases, and what he called the unfortunate publicity, and welcome me back. My mother leaned in on cue with the closer they'd clearly rehearsed in the car. And then we're a family again, honey. All of it behind us. My brother added, magnanimous as a game show host, that they'd even let me keep the house. I want to be honest about what I felt, because this channel is where I get to be, not rage. A colossal echoing tiredness, and underneath it, steady as 40 beats a minute. Something that had finished forming in me at that warehouse podium. I let them play the whole piece to the end without interrupting. Every teacher knows you don't stop a student mid-passage when they're this committed to the wrong notes. You let the chord land and let them hear it. Then I stood, walked to the piano, and slid open the drawer beneath the lid. I didn't take out the letters first. I took out a single sheet of paper, kept it face down against my knee, and sat on the piano bench, facing the three of them at their own eye level, which is how you deliver hard news to people you intend to leave standing. Before you hear my answer, Dad, you should know what I know. And I said it evenly at tempo, no crescendo. Meridian Creating LLC 6 years. To 18 million. The audit Grandpa commissioned quietly 2 years ago. The exposure he bought back with his own money, so the company's books would never show a scar. The reorganization that everyone found so mysterious. A wall built around a sun disguised as an org chart. My father did not move. I have seen him angry my whole life. I had never once seen him without a next sentence. The blood left his face in stages like a room where someone is walking through turning off lamps. And my mother, this is the detail I didn't plan for and will never forget. My mother turned to look at him and said in a small voice with no gala in it at all, "Gordon, what is she talking about?" She hadn't known. 35 years married to the man, and the sealed file in my study knew him better than she did. Brent's hand crept toward his chest pocket, some animal instinct to protect the camera. I turned the sheet over at last. Not the audit, just Grandpa's single handwritten page, and I read them the only sentence of it they'd ever hear. This file is only ever a shield, never a sword. I looked at my father. It stays sealed, Dad, it was always going to. That part isn't a negotiation. It's an inheritance. Then I laid the codicil on the piano lid between the teacups, and I read it to them exactly as he wrote it at reading lesson speed, so no one could claim afterward they hadn't understood. 10 million each, 30 million total, sitting closer to their hands than the sugar bowl, released within 12 months on one handwritten condition. If, in Ava's sole judgment, they came to her as family and not as claimants. The room went so quiet I could hear the radiator tick, and I watched 30 million do to their faces what money always did in my family. My brother's eyes performed the calculation. My mother's hands found each other. My father surfaced from his silence with the fluency of a man smelling a deal returning to the table. My mother recovered first, and she was good. She was always good. Sweetheart, everything we did, the house, the lease, all of it, that was grief. You know that this family loves you. I picked up the 2 letters and told them what each one was plainly. No theater. This one releases everything. This one ends it forever. No appeal. He didn't ask me to price your grief, I said. He asked one question. How did you come to me? You came to a lawyer's office and had a settlement printed before his headstone was cut. You came to my door at dawn with a locksmith. You came to this room with a camera in a shirt pocket. Hi, Brent. My brother's hand froze halfway to his chest, and my mother turned to stare at him. And in that stillness, I set the determination letter on my grandmother's lace runner, clicked my pen, the metronome ticking beside it, where I had started its pendulum, 40 to the minute, his tempo, and signed my name on the Steinway, where I learned everything I know. In front of the 3 of them, before anyone could arrange a softer face. It is the only signature of my life I have practiced. It came out steady. My father stood up so fast the teacup went over and 36 years came out of him at last, unbudgeted. He didn't smash anything. He testified the architecture school, the acceptance letter he'd kept in a drawer under his diplomas like a death certificate. 1-year son. He did the voice, his father's voice, frighteningly well. A lifetime of private rehearsal in it. The drawings that stopped the Saturdays on loading docks while his classmates built skylines. I gave him my life, he said, and his voice cracked on the word like a boy's. I earned him. Do you understand me? I earned him and he skipped me. For what? For her. She never gave him anything but noise on a Sunday. You just played piano. The sentence landed in the room, and stayed there ringing, and the small red light in my brother's pocket drank in every syllable. And I'll tell you now, since the story deserves its accounting. Weeks later, a board editor on Brent's payroll, still owed for 2 invoices, would leak that footage himself. And the town that had spent a season calling me the villain would hear my father price his own grief in his own voice, and no statement I ever made could have done what his did. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. The disease does its own publicity. But in the room, in the moment, I only stood there with my hand flat on the signed letter. And when he ran out of testimony, I answered him at the tempo I was raised at. You gave your life to his money, Dad. I gave him Sundays, he noticed. And then, because a boundary without mercy is just revenge with better posture. There is no prosecution in that file. Your pension stands. Mom, my number is unblocked. It always will be. And this room is open on Tuesdays to people, not claimants. My mother looked at the envelopes, then at me, and for 1 second I saw her almost choose. Then my father walked. And the family followed him out, because it always had. The great front door of Larkin House closed with a sound like a cord resolving, and I stood in the hall and listened to their tires go down the gravel until the evening took the sound away entirely. Marisol found me on the porch an hour later with tea I hadn't asked for. And because she is Marisol, she asked no questions and got the whole truth anyway. I told her what I had actually signed in there, because it wasn't a financial instrument. Somewhere inside me, there had been a girl at every recital of my life scanning the folding chairs for 2 faces that were never in them. Keeping 2 seats open the way you keep a porch light on. The letter on the piano was her death certificate, and I was the one who signed it. And there is no version of that arithmetic that doesn't cost. From tomorrow until the end of this town's memory, I would be the eyes who cut her own mother off from 10 million. And the fact that the condition was his and the failure was theirs would matter to almost no one standing in line at Hobbs. Being right is a cold instrument. I told Marisol, you still have to play it. She nodded and let the quiet do its work. And somewhere in that quiet, the last piece of the lesson clicked into place, the one he'd been teaching me since the first Sunday he wound that metronome. I had spent my whole life believing small was the same thing as good. That refusing power kept your hands clean. That the safest seat was the one nobody wanted. That was never virtue. That was hiding with a virtue's haircut. He didn't need me small, and he never had. He needed me steady. Steady enough to hold 7 billion worth of noise and not chase 1 decel of it. Steady enough to sign the hard letter at 40 beats a minute. Steady enough to leave a door open behind a boundary without letting anyone take the door off its hinges. That night, for the first time since March, I stopped the metronome before bed. I stood in the music room with my finger on the stilled pendulum, and the house held its breath and the silence for the first time in my life. Wasn't a room where I was waiting for somebody, it was just quiet. I slept until morning. Here's the ledger 6 months on. Because stories like mine owe you the arithmetic. The company studied under Dan Mercer. The 3 executives who did resign were replaced without a press release. And the walkout everyone promised me never came. The foundation cut its first grant in the fall. New instruments and a music room for Fairmont's Public Elementary. The check signed by a trustee who still can't read a balance sheet without moving her lips and no longer cares. Who knows? My father took early retirement, officially for personal reasons. The file that could have ended him sleeps in a vault, sealed exactly as a dead man ordered, and a piano teacher confirmed. He and my mother sold the house and moved to Arizona. Brent's channel pivoted to cryptocurrency the week after his own footage leaked, and then it went quiet, which is the closest thing to wisdom he's managed. And in December, a card came to Larkin House with no return address. My mother's handwriting, 1 line, no apology, no lawyers left in it. The pie recipe is in the tin I left you. Mom, I read it 4 times. Then I put it in the piano bench under the metronome's velvet box, where the important sheet music lives. I didn't burn it and I didn't frame it. Doors are like that now in my life. They have hinges and they have locks. And I am finally the one who decides which gets used. I won't lie to you and say the town came around because the force I was up against didn't die in my music room. It doesn't die anywhere. In April, I went to my cousin's wedding, invited by the groom's side, seated at the last table by the speakers, which in family language is a verdict. Between the toasts, I heard a great aunt say it to a woman in lavender, not quietly. Took everything from her own mother. That one, the woman in lavender looked over at me the way you look at weather. 10 years ago, I'd have left before the cake and called it dignity. Instead, I stayed. I ate the cake, which was dry. I complimented the bride, danced once with a 9-year-old who stepped on both my feet and drove home with the windows down past the plant where the second shift's lights were on and 800 paychecks were sleeping safe. They'll tell that great aunt's version of me at showers and gravesides for the rest of my life. And here is the freedom no one advertises. It doesn't require my attendance. The chain broke where I was standing. That was always the only link I could reach. It's Tuesday afternoon as I tell you this, and the ballroom of Larkin House is the loudest room in the county. 12 secondhand pianos donated and dented, a sign on the door that says Ruth Larkin Music Room. Tuition nothing. Enrollment beginners only. The terrible ones, the brave kind, exactly as ordered. A girl named Josie, 8 years old, has missed the same note 3 times, and her hands are starting to shake with it. I take the brass metronome down from the shelf, wind it, and set it on her piano. 40 beats to the minute. Hold the tempo, I tell her, never chase the noise. She squares her shoulders and plays it again. Slow, wrong in 3 new places, and absolutely unafraid. And somewhere behind the walls of that house, I'd swear on the deed, an old machinist is tapping his finger in count. If you keep one thing from my story, keep this. An inheritance is just money until somebody teaches you what to keep. The rest is noise, and noise always spends itself. A $7 billion estate, a locksmith at dawn, 2 letters on a piano lid, and I only signed 1. If someone in your life measures you by what you're worth on paper, remember that the people who count your Sundays are the ones who count. If this story found you in the middle of your own family war, tell me in the comments how you're holding your tempo. I read everyone, and if you want more stories where the quiet ones stop being quiet, subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge and turn on the bell, because next week's story starts with another knock at another door. Until then, hold the tempo.